Can emotional intelligence, or EQ, be as important to workplace performance as IQ? In a labor market that increasingly values soft skills, that question has been a going concern since EQ was first popularized in the mid-1990s. Joining us now for where things stand and where they might be headed, in Boston, Massachusetts, Katja Schlegel. She is a postdoctoral researcher at the Social Interaction Laboratory at Northeastern University. And here in our studio, Stéphane Côté, professor of organizational behavior and HR management at the Rotman School of Management at U of T. And Katja, it's good to have you on the line from Boston. Stéphane, nice to meet you here in Toronto. Let's just start with this, Stéphane. Define emotional intelligence for us.
Emotional intelligence is a series of skills, a series of capabilities that includes, for example, the ability to read other people's emotions, the ability to cope with emotion, the ability to understand where emotions come from, and the ability to utilize emotions to enhance performance or cognitive activities. A set of emotional abilities different from IQ because they focus on our emotions rather than more cognitive material such as mathematics or language.
Okay, I'm going to read a couple of excerpts now from some publications which have weighed in on this because there's a great discrepancy on whether this is a thing or whether it is not a thing, as the kids would say. Sheldon, let's bring up this excerpt first from the New Scientist magazine. Psychologists are falling out of love with emotional intelligence. The idea of emotional intelligence was eagerly received in 1995 following the publication of Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. An international bestseller, it launched an industry peddling tests to select emotionally intelligent candidates for management positions, but for all the hype and money spent, there has been a sense of disappointment. And from your institution, Stéphane, from U of T, psychology professor Jordan Peterson goes even further, saying scientifically, it's a fraudulent concept, a fad corporate marketing scheme. However, we also hear this from Joshua Friedman, the business case for emotional intelligence. And he writes, research has provided clear evidence that emotionally intelligent leaders are more successful. Many of these studies yield bottom line results. At PepsiCo, for example, executives selected for EQ competencies generated 10% more productivity. High EQ salespeople at L'Oreal brought in $2.5 million more in sales. An EQ initiative at Sheraton helped increase market share by 24%. Okay, let's find out where you two are on this. Katja, what's your view? Where are you on the debate?
So I would definitely say that it's not, so we are not done with the topic of emotional intelligence in research yet. So there have been some critiques about how emotional intelligence has been defined because people do not really agree on that. They also don't agree on how emotional intelligence should be measured. And so this whole sort of confusion in the field, which is, by the way, very young, has basically led to some results that actually are a bit pessimistic about emotional intelligence. I personally think that there's a lot of research that shows that emotions matter in our everyday lives. It matters at work, it matters in our private lives. And we can also definitely say that people differ in the way they handle emotions, and some people do better, some people do worse. I think for the moment we need to define more clearly what we mean when we talk about emotional intelligence. We should talk about different components of emotional intelligence, not about the broad term per se. And we also need to find out under which circumstances and for which types of jobs, for example, which types of competencies matter. For example, for somebody who's working on a customer service hotline, the ability to actually recognize emotions from the client's or customer's voice might be very important, whereas this might not be important at all for another profession. So I think we just need a much more differentiated view, and I think research is also going in that direction. So I'm definitely not out of love with the concept of emotional intelligence.
You're not out of love with it, but you don't sound like you're 1,000% sold on it either. Stéphane?
Oh, I'm a researcher. I have to remain objective, right?
You're going to remain objective and follow the facts. Okay, yeah. Stéphane, how about you?
I agree with Katja. I think the truth is probably right in the middle of these, somewhere in the middle of these two quotes, so the sets of quotes that you just read, where emotional intelligence does matter. There's evidence that's different from IQ, that it does predict performance in certain contexts, those where people are likely prone to feel stress or have a certain need to read emotions or to understand emotions. Emotional intelligence might not matter in certain jobs where there's very little of that, very little interpersonal interaction. But in terms of the quotes are really at the extreme of the opinions that you might have on this.
Well, we do that in media.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean that sums up everybody's view on things.
It doesn't. Katya's totally right. It's still a young field of research. Lots of studies need to be done on it. But the early results seem to suggest that emotional intelligence does matter in certain contexts, over and above other aspects of our personality and other capabilities. They do not matter all of the time. They will not solve, a company's business problems in an instant, but they matter to some extent.
Well, let's say there's more to it than just happy or sad. And to that extent, we're going to quote somebody who's not too far away from Katya right now, the Harvard Business Review, which nearly 30 years ago, the social psychologist Phil Shaver and his colleagues found that people can reliably distinguish among 135 emotions. Katya, how many emotions are included on most of the emotional intelligence tests that you study?
So actually the one widely used emotional intelligence test includes 5 emotions, if I'm not mistaken, and it shows people basically 4 still pictures in which actors just show a certain facial expression, and then you are asked about the presence or absence of 5 different emotions, so very far from 135.
I gather you are trying to develop your own kind of test, which would put that number up to about 14, is that right?
That's correct. So I would definitely not go as far as saying that these 14 are somehow the most important emotions in our lives, or that there are only 14, not at all. What I'm interested is in how many emotions do we need in order to distinguish people on how well they do at recognizing emotions in others. So given that testing is always, of course, a little bit more abstract, or like we have to reduce the complexity of real life. Obviously, we cannot study 135 emotions in one test, but I'm studying 14. And with the test that I developed that measures emotion recognition ability, actually, I have to say this test does fairly well in distinguishing who is just mediocre, who is good, and who is very good at recognizing emotions. And in that sense, that test does better than previous emotional intelligence assessments, I would say.
Well, let's dive a little deeper on that, because the test that you're involved with is called the Geneva Emotion Recognition Test, GERT, and some of the 14 emotions that you look at, joy, amusement, pride, pleasure, relief, interest, anger, fear, despair, anyway, they go on. Let's show a clip right now and we'll just find out a little bit more about what you're up to. Roll it, please, Sheldon.
Necalibam Sudmolen.
Necalibam Sudmolen.
Necalibam Sudmolen.
Okay, what's going on there?
What you just saw were 3 example video clips from the GERT that I developed in Geneva, Switzerland, where I did my PhD. And basically participants or test takers watch those clips, and after each clip they are asked to guess which of the 14 emotions that you referred to earlier is expressed in that video clip. And yeah, so this test takes about 10-15 minutes, and in the end we will, like a test taker will get a score on how many he or she recognized correctly.
You know what? I think we should play it again. Can we do that,
Okay.
Sheldon? Let's play it again, and then Stéphane and I will judge it harshly. No, let's try it again.
Necalibam Sudmolen.
Necalibam Sudmolen.
Necalibam Sudmolen.
Well, that's tricky. Now, these are all made-up
Sure.
words,
It is, right?
obviously. They're all made-up words meant to
Uh-huh.
reflect different parts of your... I don't know, Stéphane,
Sure.
what'd you see there?
I think the first one was probably fearful. I think the second one was joyful. Third one is a bit tricky. Maybe some kind of disgust, or I'm probably wrong on this one.
I don't know, let's see. Okay, Katya, how did we do?
I think you went in the right direction, obviously. So as I couldn't see the clips myself now, I just had to rely on the voice of the actors. I think the first one was anxiety, so fearful is not very far away from that.
That's pretty close,
good.
yep.
Yeah, the second one was pride, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a positive emotion, definitely. And the third one, I think, was irritation. And that's a tricky one. So that's, as you see yourself now, this test is not very easy. And it's actually, it needs to be pretty difficult so that we can distinguish who does just like in the medium range, or and who's really good. So, yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Stéphane, do you think there is value in this kind of testing?
Yeah, for sure. I think part of the confusion about the research on emotional intelligence that many people use measures where people rate themselves on emotional intelligence. I would be asking you, are you good at reading other people's emotions? And we know that these measures are, in a way that when people answer them, they can be quite biased in their assessment of their own capabilities. Not only that, even if they're not biased, people who don't know that they fail at reading emotions can't report that they fail at reading emotions. So because of that, I think that's led to some of the disappointment about research in emotional intelligence that you've mentioned earlier. These kinds of measures, like the one we just saw, will correct these problems and offer a more objective way of measuring emotional intelligence, very similar to the more objective ways in which we currently measure cognitive abilities.
And Katja, I want to better understand as well why you landed on those 14. I understand that 5 may be too few, 135 you think is too many. Why those 14?
That's an excellent question. So I have to admit I was working with a database of video clips that was created in Geneva before I started my PhD. And in that database there are actually 18 emotions that I didn't really pre-select, but they were selected basically to cover positive and negative emotions and emotions that are characterized by high and low arousal. And so I chose those 14 just actually for psychometric criteria, so the complicated statistical stuff. But basically those were the 14 that the 10 actors in that database were most reliably able to express in a way that other people also would recognize what they were trying to express. So that's the reason.
Gotcha. 14 a good number as far as you're concerned?
I think it's a good number. People have talked about 20 years ago, people were talking about 6 basic emotions: anger, fear, surprise, disgust, happiness, and I'm missing one, sadness. And now we're discovering that there might be more than those 6. So for example, Katja mentioned pride. So that's an emotion that 20 years ago, researchers weren't focused on too much. But now with more interest in the positive side of emotions, we're looking at more differentiated positive emotions such as pride, hope. And so definitely, I think there's more than 6.
Yeah, give me your 6 again.
So anger, disgust, fear, sadness.
That's 4 negative ones.
4 negative ones.
Happiness.
Happiness, a positive one, and surprise, which could be negative or
could
positive.
Could be either way.
Yeah. So now researchers are focusing more on the positive and discovering, differentiating between all the different positive states that exist.
Gotcha. Katja, here's a tricky one. I've often heard that you can teach people to be more intelligent and therefore have better IQs. Can you teach people to have higher EQs?
That's a great question. So there's not a lot of research at the moment on whether this is possible or not. Some people have tried, especially in the field of developmental psychology. So there are actually quite successful programs implemented at schools in the US that teach not only the single student, but also the whole class, and including the teachers and so on, that teach emotional skills to them, and they have been pretty successful. For adults, well, it's still an open question whether you just end up with the emotional intelligence that you have and there's nothing that you can do about it or not. I personally think you can definitely teach it. Again, here we would probably have to look at the specific components of emotional intelligence, such as recognizing emotions or handling your own emotions. So I am currently running a set of studies, or actually already finished them here at Northeastern, where I train people to recognize emotions in others. So whether it's a training that is takes about 45 minutes and is computer-based, and people basically learn the cues in the face, the voice and the body that are associated with the different emotions. And I actually found that people, as a result of that training, do improve on emotion recognition. I also found that these effects persist over at least 4 weeks. And I also found that people who did that training, they were actually more cooperative in a negotiation that they were doing with an unacquainted partner after the training, and that they actually also achieve more cooperative financial outcomes in the negotiation. So my results for the moment suggest that, at least for emotion recognition, you might be able to train it. Then for other components, I think there's even, like managing other people's emotions, there's even less research to date than on emotion recognition.
Well, let's follow up on this a bit, because the assumption is if you've got a higher EQ, then you are on your way to being a more marvelous, wonderful person. But Stéphane, I think you know about a study which suggests that high emotional intelligence can equate to more Machiavellian tendencies in the workplace. Am I onto something here?
For certain people, people that might have a Machiavellian personality can actually use emotional intelligence for, to promote their own interests in a more successful way. So that's an important point about emotional intelligence. It doesn't mean it's not important to actually train it, but it should be, this training might be accompanied with some ethics or morality training, if that's true. But we do find that, first of all, we do find a positive correlation. So on average, people that score high on emotional intelligence tests are, all else equal, more friendly, more agreeable, less self-serving. But it's a small to moderate correlation, meaning there are some people at this quadrant of being high on emotional intelligence and being quite self-serving. And we found that those people can actually use emotional intelligence in order to benefit their own interests in the workplace, to kind of exploit other people. And that's something that is sometimes said about emotional intelligence, that it's almost, I think Daniel Goleman has equated it with character, and that's not what we're finding.
Shouldn't do that. You should not equate high EQ with high character.
You should not.
You should not. Okay. Katja, there's obviously a great deal of communication happening these days, digitally speaking. So I wonder whether you think the use of emojis is a useful tool for communicating emotional content.
Oh, I would say it's absolutely a useful tool for communicating emotional content. Of course, so it's something that can complement our just verbal written text messages. Definitely, I use emojis a lot. I think I think there are probably cultural differences in what emojis should be used or what they mean in different cultures. Sometimes I have to say, for some emojis, I don't really understand what they are supposed to mean. So I do think it requires probably a certain level of emotional intelligence in deciding which ones to send and how to interpret the ones that you receive.
Stéphane, are you a smartphone guy?
I am.
Do you use emojis when you communicate?
I use them, especially one reason why emotional intelligence matters so much is that emotions communicate information, right? So your facial expression communicates information to me non-verbally that I can use, that we can coordinate, communicate better. When we send text messages or emails, a lot of these signals are missing, are gone.
They always say that it's terrible for conveying tone, right?
Exactly.
Emails and text messages?
Exactly.
So an emoji helps.
It does help. However, there could be problems, as Katja just mentioned, if they're used in a wrong context, it can backfire. But I'd say on average, the majority of these emojis help in terms of, for example, conveying sarcasm or conveying that something is a joke rather than just a factual statement. An emoji can help in communicating that information to the recipient. In the absence of an emoji, the communication on the other side could be completely misinterpreted.
Gotcha. Katja, we're down to our last minute here. I wonder what advice you might give to HR departments regarding if and when to use emotional intelligence testing when they're hiring people?
I think I would definitely advise them to not use self-report questionnaires that are quick and dirty, but rather to go for performance-based testing, like with tests that, like the one that we saw earlier, and also to probably adapt the tests that they are using to their specific organization, the needs that they have, the types of jobs that they are looking for, and to invest in that. And I think then they might actually be very happy with the outcomes.
Stéphane, last 30 seconds to you.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
To use performance tests to think about the job and what kind of emotions are going to be involved in that job, and to try to focus on these components. But we've found in almost every study we've done a correlation with job performance, and therefore there can be some gain to obtain by selecting people with higher levels of these skills.
Gotcha. Well, I wouldn't want my views on this to be misconstrued, so let's just say my thoughts about this interview were right there. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Passing that along. Good enough. Katja Schlegel in Boston, Massachusetts at Northeastern University. Good of you to join us on the line from the home of the Red Sox. And Stéphane Côté from the Rotman School of Management at U of T. Good to have you alongside as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.